This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia. Hi everyone, welcome to this video. Today we're going to talk about 5 things that drive us nuts when we live in Russia. Lots of people told us we should not talk about this, but in another video very soon we will talk about the 5 things we love about Russia. So this is just kind of sharing our experience, what it's like being a foreigner in Russia. The first one is that Russians have no concept of lines. This materializes in many, many ways. I will give a story from my experience, and Marcus can give a story from his time in Russia too. The best example I can give of this is when I went to study in Russia, you had to do a medical exam. The medical exam, you get to the doctor's office, and there's like 7 or 8 doctors you have to see. You have to do like a vision test. They test your heart. That you do like an x-ray. I mean, it's way in depth for studying, but that's just the rule in Russia. Well, I get there. There's not that many people in line, but you have to get in a line behind each door for each doctor, right? So you get in line on the first one, you see the doctor, and then you go on to the next one. Well, Russians don't see it that way. The way Russians see it is one person comes in, they go to the first door, and they tell the person who's last in line, I'm behind you. Then they immediately go to the second door, and they tell the person in line who's there, I'm behind you. Well, then what happens is that you think you're third in line, but there's actually 9 people between, the second and the third person in line. So the person ahead of me went into the doctor, came out, and then this other lady just scurries right in, and I say like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And she's like, oh yeah, I was behind him. And so what should have taken, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 hours took literally 2 full work days of waiting in all of these lines to see all of the different doctors, to get all of the signatures and stamps on the medical certificate. Very, very frustrating. What about you, Marcus?
Okay, so we say the no concept of lines. I think it's just the concept of lines is completely different, right? So
yeah.
You are, if you're in line at the supermarket and they have 4 cash registers or whatever. Usually there'll be a line at each cash register, but if they're very, very close together, kind of like at Walmart, if they're like those quick lines, I would think, okay, I'm in line for the next one that opens up, right? Russians typically see it as 4 separate lines. So I'm like, standing there waiting for one of the 4 windows to open or cash registers to open, and I would be next. But they would kind of go past you and stand right next to that window or cash register. And this happens, anywhere really. In the metro, people cutting in front of you. If There's a Russian saying that how many Russians fit on a bus? 1 more, right? Because if there's space, then it will be filled by someone.
No, even if there's not space, they will still, like on the metro at rush hour, if there's no space, they'll just find it.
Literally, if there's any space, that they'll squeeze in there. And I think this goes against our, I don't know, just our upbringing, because as Americans, you have lots of space, you stay out of people's way. And then number 2 on our list of what we don't like about Russia is lack of personal boundaries.
Yeah.
A stranger could come up to you on the street, or, you're standing around waiting for a bus, and they're standing right next to you, touching your shoulder to shoulder, and you think, why is he standing so close? Or why, that's odd, very odd. And if you're in line, especially, they don't want to lose their spot,
right.
If there's extra space there, so they'll stand really close to you. And it's odd at like at a bank, you're talking about your finances, or or at a doctor's office or something, and that's personal information you don't want leaking out, right? So that's definitely this lack of personal boundaries. Definitely,
Well, I
you'll
think
notice
it goes.
that when
I
you
think
go
it
to
goes
Russia.
one step further than that too. I encountered many times. I would even go so far as to say it happens multiple times a week, where just some stranger will come up and give you some piece of advice, but it's never a positive piece of advice. They'll just come up and tell you you're doing this wrong,
It's
you're doing
criticism.
that wrong. Criticism, yeah. One thing that comes to my mind very quickly. It bothered me at the time. I mean, obviously I didn't think about it much longer, but I was just walking the dog, and this guy comes up and he just says, "Your dog looks like a rat." For what? Like, why would someone come up and even make a comment like that? I just cannot even think of why I would go up to a stranger and give some negative opinion of mine to them. It's just strange.
Have you
But you'll
have you
find
ever
that
been
this happens a lot.
Have you ever been told by anyone, but especially a Russian babushka,
Oh,
that
yeah.
you walk out in the winter, like really
socks are
quickly,
too
maybe
short.
so you walk out in shorts or something to get something to go, into the next shop in the same building.
Yeah.
And she's like, one time, she had a rolled newspaper and slapped my friend on the bottom because slapped his butt, and she's like, "Shame on you for being dressed so
Yeah.
not dressed for the weather." And we were just going into the next door.
Right.
So you'll get those pieces of advice, unsolicited pieces of advice from
Right.
complete strangers, and they're kind of upfront in your face. This looks terrible. Your Russian is
Right.
terrible, or something like that.
Right. Well, again, it's not necessarily that they're giving you advice. It's just that it's not even like they're in a conversation with you. I'm talking about people who literally walk out of their way to tell you something negative. It's strange, but you
Right.
get used to it. The next thing on our list
To
is
ignoring it.
right. But the next thing on our list is asking multiple times and getting different answers every single time. This happens all the time in Russia, especially if you are asking someone in government bureaucracy, right? Like, how do I do X? Well, you do this. But then if you ask another guy, they'll give you a completely different answer. Just very frustrating, something that we encountered.
If you're filling out a form, one employee will tell you something different, completely different than the next employee. Or if you call a call center, and I called Tinkoff Bank one time. I said, can I open an account as a foreigner? And I got the person on the line said, "Let me check." Came back, "No, you cannot." Then I called again, got a different person. They're like, "Yeah, you can." So
Right.
I mean, it's constantly you
Well,
have
what's
that
even more
all the
frustrating
time.
about this is that the people who tell you yes you can and no you can't are never the decision makers. This happens all
Right.
the time, right? So like one person tells you can, you go and you try to do it, then you can't. There's a different decision maker.
And if you
Someone
if you
then tells
suggest
can,
that
then you
they
get
go to their superior and ask, if you suggest that, they're like, "No, I'm right.
right,
I'm not going to ask my boss."
right, yeah. So
The next one, number 4, is okay. So this was very, very odd to me at first. Russians find it very hard to celebrate other people's fortune or success.
yep,
I mean, so Russian friendship is very deep. You can share a lot of things with your really good friends, but sometimes even the good friends you would expect maybe from acquaintances or people you don't know to kind of judge you or you share something and they're like, "Why are you complaining about that?" or "Your life's much better than mine." But sometimes it comes from friends and they kind of like slips out. And so, for example, we had a lot of Russian friends before we moved from Russia to Europe. A lot of friends would, or acquaintances, were bummed because we were leaving Russia and they weren't.
I
So
think
they weren't really.
You should clarify though, Marcus. They were not mad because you had that opportunity. They were mad because they also didn't have that opportunity. It's kind of like a jealousy
Right.
thing.
Exactly. And in those circumstances, it's sometimes, depending on the person, you don't want to share information with that person because they will make those, minor judgments about you or your situation. And it's like you don't want to be you don't want them to bring you down with comments like, "Oh, it's like you say, "Oh, I got this good deal." And they have to one up you, or but it's the opposite. They have to say, well, why would you do that, or something, Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes a little bit differently for me, at least in my experience. I think one of the biggest sort of, it's hard to say. I agree with you 100%. This definitely happens. And it's sometimes surprising when it's a good friend, right? I think one of a good example in my life is, one of my wife's friends also being upset that, we moved to the US for a period of time. I would actually rather live in Russia. The problem is that I couldn't find a good enough job in Russia at the time. And then, they get angry, or one of the things my wife always complains about is how other people count how much money she has. You always have this.
Yeah, that's a big
money
one.
is a very sensitive topic in Russia. Nobody tells what their salary is, which is quite similar to the US. But Russians are always trying to figure out how much money you actually make. It's kind of annoying sometimes, right? So like if you don't bring a bottle of wine that's expensive enough for what they think you make, they'll think something of that, or tell one of their friends, and then it gets back to you. And money is a very kind of strange topic in Russia. I would
Well, a good example I would say is, let's say, you're driving a nice car, and a Russian might see that and say, "Oh, he has money," right? Even an acquaintance, like, "Wow, you bought a new car," but they don't know where your priorities are, right?
Right.
So they'll be quick to judge, like, "Oh, and then maybe you're out at dinner the next week, and you say, "Oh, they can afford it because they, based on the car that you drive, you can afford to take the bill." Right. Those are the types of things, and they don't really ask. They just make that judgment and be like, "Oh, he can afford it."
Right.
Based on the car you drive. So
almost all Russians, again, they have assumptions about how much money you make. Again, this does not impact life. This does not impact, loving to live in Russia, but it is something that gets frustrating from time to time.
Yeah.
And the last thing on our list, number 5, is customer service. And I want to make a statement real quick that while customer service in Russia is generally very, very bad, in Moscow it is changing, and in St. Petersburg it's also changing. Probably some of the other big cities where I haven't spent as much time as well, where you find customer service much better than you can find in the US. But generally, customer service in Russia is very, very bad. I would even go as far to say that in Russia, I always got the feeling that when you were going into a shop or going in to buy something, that the onus of actually buying something was on you, not the seller the salesperson who should be trying to sell you on something. I always felt that you go in and you ask a question and you feel like you're a burden to the salesperson.
Right,
Whereas, you're like, I'm coming in to buy something. You should be trying to sell me on this to get me to buy it to get out of here. And you make, commission, whatever. But in Russia, I always found, that you were like a burden asking questions as the seller, which is kind of
and they would express that in non-verbally too. They'd be like, big sighs that somebody comes in the shop.
Do you have like these kinds of tomatoes? Go over there. They're by the other tomatoes. We have that one, and that one. You just get terrible customer service in most places. Restaurants too. It's like, especially as an American, Americans are very picky. I'm not, but you find Americans, they're like, "Oh, do you have that little ingredient in the pizza?" They're like, "I don't know. I need to go check."
And then they would say, "Oh, I would need to go check." And an American or Westerner might think, "Oh, he's gonna go check," but they're just like, "I would need to go check. You want me to go all the way back to the
right. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. No,
I would say I've been in multiple situations where I have felt like I am annoying them by offering to buy, whatever they're
Yes.
selling. Like,
yes.
I just want to clarify a few things before I make my final decision.
Right.
And they're just sighing or, oh man, you're wasting my time. Although they're at their job.
Right.
So one example that I can give, when I went into a mobile shop, MTS. This was probably in 2000. I want to say 2014 or 2013. I can't remember what I wanted, but I went up to a small mobile shop. I went up to the counter. The girl is on her phone, looking at her phone the whole time, and I said, I want to put some money on my phone because I was out for the month or whatever. And she didn't look up the whole time she was talking. Well, she didn't talk that much, but she didn't look up into, to see who was there.
Right.
She just said, "The system is down. Come back later." I thought that was super rude to do.
Representative, though, of customer service that you can definitely get.
That's a good example, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, those are the 5 things that bother us when we're in Russia. None of them are deal breakers for sure, but they are definitely things that are very apparent if you're paying attention to them. But if you have other things that you found annoying in Russia, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear. Maybe we can make another video about other things. This was Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from An Expat's Russia. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have a question about Russia, let us know in the comments. We'll answer it in another video.